I'm just going back to this question of historical memory that you mentioned, Alex, because it's so important. What responsibility do we have to be moral witnesses for the dead? Not just future generations. Do we have a responsibility to those people who basically were killed in concentration camps and in gulags, and who the Chinese are now putting in camps in China because they're Muslims? How do we imagine not simply historical memory as an intellectual capacity? How do we imagine it as a political responsibility? How do we imagine it as a moral responsibility? How do we fit it into the concept of moral witnessing? How do we merge it with a notion of transgression that both illuminates in the past, but at the same time holds it accountable for the present and the future? Yeah, that's what I really wanted to say. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, that's crucial. The underlying, that's one of the things that always comes through in your public talks and in your writing is your absolute moral clarity and courage and commitment. And where do you see that happening today? Where are the sources in which those kinds of energies are being articulated and organized?
Oh, God, I think that I see it happening in a number of places that I think is very illuminating and very moving. I see it with the teachers who went on strike last year over questions of gun violence. I see it with the young people who walked out of their schools. I think the George Floyd movement was just amazing. Nothing like it, actually, almost in American history, in terms of bringing Black and white people together to sort of really talk about and protest in the midst of a pandemic, no less, systemic racism. I think the Black Lives Movement in its ways in which it's reaching beyond national borders to align itself with Palestinian youth, Egyptian youth. These are all very promising movements. I think that to go back to maybe an issue that Amy had raised, I think the question, and I need to correct myself on this. I actually think the question of pedagogy, while maybe it's lacks some of the sophistication that, who am I to talk about this lacking of sophistication, because I was part of a certain movement in the 80s. Let me correct that a bit. I was lucky. We had the opportunity. We did some things that I thought were important. But a lot of people now are taking a pedagogy in ways that are amplifying its political possibilities. It's political thrust. It's everywhere. I have people writing to me from every part of the world talking about pedagogy. Think about Alex in the 1980s or 1990s. That was not true. That was just not happening. And I think that when Donald Trump claims that he wants to create political forms of education, that charge is basically about pedagogy. That's an attack on pedagogy, because it seems to me that when you begin to say, look, we can't. I remember Jeb Bush in Florida passed a law claiming that social science teachers in the high school could not teach history as interpretation. They could only teach it as facts. That was actually a law. And it seems to me it resuscitates what Hannah Arendt had said all her life. Thinking is dangerous. And Foucault said he talked about dangerous thinking. Dangerous memories was his term, dangerous memories. And I think we have an obligation to resuscitate what it means to make trouble, in Baldwin's sense, right? What it means to in some way call into question those forms of to research and so forth and so on. We need to resuscitate the silent questions, the neglected connections. That should be one of the things that I would think as public intellectuals we should do. And I think that we have to accept the fact that the consequences for that are going to be severe. You're not going to get awards. You're going to get potentially fired. You're not going to get tenure. And maybe you will, but it's not easy. It's not easy. When I look at my career, my God, over the course of 40 years, denied tenure, salary, frozen, it goes on. And people say, well, would you do this over? Of course I would do it over. I wouldn't think for 1 minute of changing my way of being in the world. Why would I do that? And why aren't people on the edge of saying, hey, look, we have an obligation to future generations, not just existing generations. That's a long-term project. That's not something that we define our careers by. I hate that word careerism. I think that, unless you have a vocation, you're in trouble.